They say when you stare into the abyss stares back, but that's not true. After all, there's nothing down there. Nothing except an endless void of darkness and emptiness tempting your mind to give it meaning. When the abyss does stare back, it is merely the projections of whatever you have locked away within your own thoughts given form. The abyss is what you make of it. The monsters you see down there are the ones of your own creation. Your projections give the darkness power. And I wonder what would happen if, while peering down, you saw a mirror. But instead of seeing yourself, someone else was in your reflection. How long would you need to stare before you question the only constant you had when you first started looking into the void? Your own identity. Would you wonder, even if just for a moment, maybe the person you saw in your reflection was you all along? Chainsaw Man provides us an in-depth exploration of this idea, filling each metaphorical thought from the abyss to the mirror to whoever looks within them, and this video is going to explore that. My name is Josh, I'm the host of Beyond Media, and this is why in Chainsaw Man, the monster is you. Chainsaw Man is one of, if not my favorite shonen series ever to have been brought to life, and in large part due to the absolutely brilliant feats of character work and subtle storytelling emanating from nearly every chapter or major arc of the story. But to not lose sight of the original analogy, let's get specific. There are three things that we need to identify for us to be able to analyze that analogy: the reflection in the mirror, the abyss itself, and the person peering within. Let's start with that last one first. In every story, there is a character that is designed by nature to be sympathized with. Whether that be initially or after a bit of time depends on the narrative, but in Chainsaw Man, that person is Denji. Generally, there are three main things that I can see drawing any one viewer in upon their initial read of Chainsaw Man and our main character, starting with 1. Denji is a character that is easy to give sympathy to. These are the people who maybe do not catch all of the true depth of his character that is laced in his subtlety, but even still do not level any form of judgment to his more strange or out-of-pocket behavior. They are maybe even able to understand that there is more than meets the eye, but ultimately do not peel things back on a first or second watch, instead allowing the natural sympathy for the character to guide their interest. 2. Denji is a character that you can relate to. These are who, because of past experiences, understanding of tone or genre or circumstance, are able to identify themselves within his character. They are quick to air out the smokescreen bits of comedy or misdirection due specifically to their understanding of themselves reflected through a character. And 3, some combination of both those previous two. The reason this is important is because depending on who you are when the series begins, you will view the main character and his circumstances slightly differently and at different intensities. However, which one you are arguably does not matter. If it wasn't obvious to you already, the person who is looking into the abyss is Denji. He is the medium by which the series is colored. Everything within this world, from the characters to the conflict to the setting, are dictated by his perception. Because of this, whichever person you were when you started the series, over time, you will likely gradually drift ever so closer to being the second person who, through experience with the narrative, begins to find small ways to relate to Denji. Whether it's something broad like poverty or dangerously intimate like the desperation for human connection, the longer you spend with him, the more you will be able to find something that you are personally able to latch onto. There are a lot of things that make a character engaging from a narrative perspective. Sometimes you get that character's engagement from an overwhelming competence in one area or another, or they're incredibly endearing or admirable, and yet at other times it is simply the mastery by which they excel within their role in the narrative. For Denji, I think this comes from the ability to embody the distinct expression of lacking. While he does exist within his own identity very early on in the story, that identity is one that exhibits a person dictated by the absence of something rather than the inherent incorporation of it. The lack of love, lack of finances, lack of autonomy, and lack of choice are all things that heavily dictate his initial perception and understanding. When you take the first chapter, for example, in isolation, even if you do grasp the deeper elements of his character, Denji will still remain a vague unknown. The dreams he talks about and their simplistic nature are somewhat far cries from what most of us have ever desired. It is often just one step too far from what most can consider relatable. The ideas of debt, poverty, and workplace pressure are ones that many can relate to, but to the extreme of having a single piece of bread, being hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, or constantly putting your life on the line with crappy management are not. However, as the series continues on to its earlier arcs, many of these problems become solved at their very base, and are allowed to become easier to connect to. Romantic dilemmas, struggles with identity, or even lessons in grief are all much more relatable under this new context. Even over just the first season, Denji will slowly change from being a target of sympathy or even relatability to someone who you are able to see yourself in, even in just one or two ways. You may begin to root for him, not necessarily because he's merely relatable, but because he is proof of concept of something that you have been through, are going through now, or can empathize with. And while initially Denji may be the person who stares into the darkness, giving us a proxy by which to see for ourselves, eventually that stops happening. We as the audience begin to slowly project ourselves onto Denji. We see him as our vessel, not only to experience the world, but to achieve victory or endurance within it. After a while, you start to cheer for him from a place of vicarious joy. After a while, you begin to understand him and empathize with him on a level that previously your mind might not have allowed. After a while, Denji becomes the abyss, and the person who is left staring into him, projecting yourself onto him, is you, the viewer. You are the one who sees yourself, sympathizes, and relates to Denji, desperately hoping that he achieves his dream and peace, not only for him, but also for yourself. But if that's the case, who is in the mirror? Who is the person that you see where you should see Denji, and where you should see yourself? There are a lot of characters in Chainsaw Man that have a tremendous impact on Denji's life, and each truly revolutionizes him in their own way, whether it be Power helping to teach him the mutual capacity for authentic love, or Aki providing a sense of brotherhood and protection, or Himeno becoming his first friend. All are instrumental in his development from dog to human. When you take a look at Chapter 1, all his desires can be boiled down and reduced to one major thing. Denji has a deep desire to be loved, and all of the aforementioned characters do provide growth toward that ideal. However, Makima far and away dominates the narrative in terms of control over Denji, stringing him along by using his dreams and desires to manipulate his every action. Makima as a character is one that is heavily intertwined with Denji, arguably even more than anyone else in this series. Initially, while our plans are to use Denji to defeat the Gun Devil, even in the first season, it's not hard to pick out that there is something else that she wants from him. The suggestion that what she's doing is always a little bit more than what she wants you to think. And not just with Denji, but with every major character in the story. The only question is, what does she want, and why is she doing this? As Denji begins to grow into more of who he becomes in the later parts of the story, Makima continues to mold him just like how she did when she was teaching him about intimacy or showing what a warm meal tastes like. However, for a bit, we're going to need to look at some spoilers from Makima's character within the manga regarding her motivations. If you're still interested in the concept of this video, there will be more exploration on this topic that you could skip to if you want to not get spoiled. Click this timestamp here, which will take you away from any Chainsaw Man spoilers that you might want to avoid. Makima, as the Control Devil, has a very interesting relationship with other people. The nature of her existence is one of domination, with the disposition, power, and identity to need and want control over others. However, what's so interesting about this is when it's held up to Makima's true desires and what she longs for within the story. In chapter 96, while Makima is holding the chainsaw heart, she says, quote, "Chainsaw Man, you belong to me now. We'll be together forever. Let's eat a lot together, sleep together, and live a happy life together." And later in chapter 97, Pochita says regarding Makima, quote, "She could only form relationships through the power of fear, so she always longed for something like a family." While Makima's very nature is to use people as tools to get what she wants, assigning value to them by usefulness, unable to even see their faces and acknowledge them as real people, she doesn't long for control, but instead an equal. Makima just wants someone to love her, just like how Denji did back at the beginning of the story. Except, at this point in the narrative, You followed Denji for nearly 100 chapters. You have sympathized and empathized and understood him. You have been allowed to project even a tiny piece of who you are onto him as he became the Abyss, tempting your mind to assimilate with him, desperate to make you understand. And in just a moment, as the mirror reveals itself from the depth of that abyss, the reflection you see isn't Denji, and it isn't even you. Instead, the reflection is Makima. She has been on the exact same emotional journey with the exact same emotional desires that Denji has been on this entire time, only we have not been privy to looking at her and understanding the nature of her existence until now. If at all you stared into the abyss and the abyss began to look like Denji, then inevitably you must also see Makima as well. And the realization that comes with your understanding of Denji forcing you, even if only briefly, to contend with the idea that maybe you are not so different from the monster yourself. Assuming that Fujimoto's character work was effective at drawing you into Denji's character and making you afraid of Makima, then the reveal that, at a fundamental level, these two are not so different feels like a gut punch. Fujimoto uses Denji to let you feel and learn everything there is to know about lack of family, love, emotional understanding, and desire, then applies them all at once to the series' villain. And what that does is forces you, at the very least, to have some sympathy for the monster. The nature of a dynamic like this is interesting, because there are a lot of reasons why Denji and Makima aren't alike. Both handle these circumstances and desires in different ways. There is enough smoke and mirrors to change the reflections of what sits at the hearts of these two characters, but I think that once you see it, and once you really get it, all those differences feel all but inconsequential. In the end, at their core, both are beings desperate for love and connection. While initially Makima was an enigma, through watching and living with Denji, you get it. You understand the pain they have been under and what that can look like through the course of a story, because you watched it happen. A little while ago, we uploaded this video, and within the first few moments, I mentioned that Griffith is one of the characters that I see myself in, and that single line sparked a lot of comments and discussion below the video. Some people made some interesting assumptions about me, and some people defended me, and in a way, rightfully so. There's only speculation that people can make assumptions on. No one is entitled to exactly what makes me as a human being relate to Griffith. However, if I had instead placed Guts as a placeholder instead of Griffith, none of those comments would have been written. Guts is the surrogate to the story of Berserk. He is the metaphorical abyss that those who read it are able to project themselves onto. Guts winning and continuing to fight spurs hope, and seeing him forge for himself a dream and a reason to live instead of merely survive is beautiful. And the person that makes that happen is Griffith. He is so desperately far from Guts in terms of his own identity, but that massive gap doesn't reduce Guts down to nothingness or force people to feel down on themselves, because the brilliant commander loved by so many whispers to Guts not reminders of difference or condemnation, but with images of what he could be. When I look at Griffith in his earlier years, or even on the cusp of the eclipse, I see a man desperate to justify his own existence through his dream. And when I look at Guts away in the mountains, I see the exact same thing. I mean, haven't you ever had a dream before? Is there anything that you fought tooth and nail for? Have you ever felt the utter despair and loss of identity when everything you held on to shattered before your very eyes? Can you see yourself just maybe giving up everything only to maintain your sense of self? Because your sense of self is all you've ever had. In order to relate to Guts, you must at the very least understand Griffith. The two are thematically and emotionally inseparable. My desire and hope for peace force me to see myself in Guts desperately fighting for Dawn, yet the awareness of my own nature forces me to understand the extreme part of that desire and see myself in Griffith. They explore the central ideas of a story tainted with just a little downward momentum, a spotlight on the pitfalls anyone who relates to the hero is able to be ensnared by, and it's not always a fun revelation. After all, when you stare into the abyss, inevitably, the abyss will stare back, and it's easy to look away at the darkness when it's given form. In order to explore why or how something like this happens, we're going to need to talk about something very crucial to a story, and why these types of dynamics like Denji and Makima or Guts and Griffith are so powerful for those who partake of it. Theme is one of those words used in analysis or video essays as sort of a buzzword. It can almost feel like flashing a badge that proves, hey, I read the story with my eyes open, I have good media literacy. But what exactly is theme anyway? Well, most of the time you'll hear people articulate a series theme in a single word. My little brother has been recently watching Attack on Titan, and so I've gotten to experience some of the bigger twists and bits of the story with him on a first watch, so let's use that for the exploration. If you asked 100 different people what the theme of Attack on Titan is, the most common answer you'd probably get is something like freedom. But what exactly does that tell you about this series? That it's a story about freedom? A buddy of mine, Days Away, first link in the description, made a video about this a while back, talking about how so many anime use freedom as a central theme. And it's an excellent video that I highly suggest you check out, but it articulates the truth that so many stories are fixated on the idea of freedom. But that, in and of itself, isn't a theme. It's a topic. Themes in a really brilliant story are never one word. Instead, a story's theme is usually a provocative statement or a philosophical question that the story is able to explore. I mean, if AOT, One Piece, and Vinland Saga are all about freedom, that doesn't tell me what they're about specifically. For AOT, its central theme is actually spoken of within the series itself. That being, everybody is a slave to something. In this way, the series is not only about freedom, but takes a specific stance on what that interpretation of freedom is, and by using it as the guiding light for literally every major character, it remains thematically tight and connected without getting lost in the boundless interpretation of what freedom could mean. Conversely, freedom in Vinland Saga doesn't inherently look like it does in AOT. In that series, the derivative of freedom would be something like, what does it mean to be a true warrior? Or, true freedom is found in breaking free of the cycles that enslave us. It isn't only enough for Thorfinn to free himself from his rage, but also for other characters to understand and learn that violence isn't always the answer, and that being controlled by something doesn't allow you to be free in the first place. Getting down to what a series' true theme is, beyond the topic, is really vital both for understanding how the story is built and how the narrative is being guided. It's interesting because if we believe that Vinland Saga and AOT are both exploring something as vague as freedom, we would also need to contend with the idea that they both have different takeaways from what that idea means for us in the real world. But by getting specific and distilling the vague infinity of freedom into an actual theme, the two series become ones that are allowed to disagree and almost hold a discussion with each other on what the original topic means while maintaining a level of uniformity within their own universes. And while the central theme of any story is taken up by the protagonist to embody these ideas, using them as a guide to ease the reader into the narrative, it is equally the antagonist's job to shoulder that very central theme from a different perspective. This is how dynamics like Makima and Denji, or Guts and Griffith, or heck, Eren, Armin, and Mikasa are able to exist in the way that they do, because the characters are exploring that same specific idea, just in a different way. Maybe you relate to the protagonist and the hope that they color the theme with, or maybe you relate to the villain and the warning that exploration is giving. Either way, what I believe that these stories do is provoke the humanity that exists within us. Often, understanding one character will force you to understand another, and that beckons forward the empathy and perspective of anyone who honestly looks upon a series with an open mind, willing to be drawn into the story. What's great about this kind of self-exploration, or just the humanity poured into a story, is that it truly does have no inherent moral ties to you as a person. There's nothing inherently wrong in seeing yourself in Makima. In fact, I actually think that's quite safe and healthy. Someone else has reached out with their own humanity to touch yours on the other side of a narrative. And whether it be the dynamic of longing for love that you see in something like Chainsaw Man, or the identity found within one's dream like you see in Berserk, it's okay to understand it, no matter which expression or which character touches your heart a little more. After all, when you stare into the abyss stares back. Remember that you're not what you saw in the mirror or even the void. You're still you, and you can take what you saw down there and use it to grow more than you might have if you never peered downward. If you enjoyed this video, you might like the one you can check out right here. And until next time, keep dreaming.